This is Wicken in Northamptonshire, which may look to you or me like a typical English village. Over here you've got the posh manor house, you've got the church next to it. But 800 years ago, there were two churches and two manor houses, in fact two villages, separated by this little stream. Right here where we are now was Wickdeave, and over here to the south was Wickhammon. Naturally, the current residents of Wicken are keen to find out why there were two villages here in the Middle Ages, and they also want to know what happened to the church and the other bits and pieces of Wickhammon that have long since gone. They also want to know which was here first. But understandably, they're very keen to establish who's got the oldest bit of the village in their back garden. Time Team have been invited here to investigate the origins of two English villages, and as usual, we've got just 3 days to dig up the answers. Oozing with history, the village of Wicken is situated about 5 miles away from the very modern town of Milton Keynes. But we're not the only ones invited to investigate the two medieval villages that once existed here. So the hunt's on to see which village has the earliest origins. And our target area here in Wickdeave is potentially really exciting. Test pits dug in this field have turned up Saxon pottery dating way back to the 9th century. Meanwhile, our second site in Wickhammon couldn't be more different. Here we're searching for a medieval church, thought to be in this field somewhere, but we're hoping to find out if the church was built on an earlier religious site. So Helen's team are going to be working in Wickdeave, where Stuart has been mapping the lumps and bumps. He reckons most of the bigger earthworks are likely to be 15th century and to do with the manor house. But can he see any trace of anything that could be earlier?
What is interesting about the earthworks, if you filter off all the obvious stuff, there is kind of a background noise of subtle earthworks.
Show me a subtle earthwork.
Right. Mission impossible, that, isn't it?
This is a game I've played with Stuart before.
The ground rises up very slightly.
Is it just here?
That's it, yeah, it's just right.
Slight earthworks are very difficult to see, but as usual, he's got ideas on where we should dig.
My feeling is, if we're looking for background noise that's pre-manor, then we ought to be looking in this corner.
But this is the same area that you've got the early pottery down in this corner, isn't it?
It does seem that all the evidence is coming together and
so I reckon we want an area down in that corner, don't we?
So our first trench in search of the origins of Wickdeave is going in over one of Stuart's subtle earthworks, and in an area that's also turned up Saxon pottery. Over at Wickhammon, Sam wants to get on with finding the village's missing church, a building that was pulled down in the 17th century. Stuart, who's much in demand this morning, has found an old map he thinks will help.
1717 it's dated. There's the village, is there, and you can see this little parcel in there, which is quite difficult to read at that scale. But if you blow it up, look what it says, the old churchyard, which I think might be a bit of a clue.
Yeah, might be, yeah.
And it also shows a building just there, which I'm confident is that barn behind us.
Oh yes, that looks appropriate.
So this map doesn't show the church at all, but it does give us the area of the churchyard, which is actually over there under where that crop is.
So it's in here somewhere, but where exactly? John's talking to the farmer, who reckons he can narrow down the search.
This is a very light field, particularly this end of the field.
Yeah.
But there's a patch, you can see a ridge just across here where the crop is tall, a little bit higher. And when we work the field, there is masses of stone there. Big stone like that.
OK, well, I'll arrange for the machine to come in and we'll take as smaller area as possible.
Yes, that's accepted. That's what we've agreed.
So the business of clearing the crop gets underway in Wickhammon. Basically, all we need to do is flatten the wheat so that Geophys can get in to do their survey. Over at Wickdeave, we're opening up a second trench and turning up a lot of 13th century pottery.
Oh, yeah.
Clearly, there were people living here in medieval times.
You go.
I think that looks a bit better.
Yeah, that's the stuff.
There's some big old pieces.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Where's this coming from?
Pottersbury, just up the road. It's called Pottersbury because it was full of potters. There's been, in the medieval times, there's been about 20 kilns excavated there, and it's only a little village, but it's stuffed full of pottery kilns.
Back at Wickhammon, Geophys are ready to reveal the first ever picture of this village's long-lost church.
I mean, it's not a clear footprint of a church, but I mean, there's definitely a building here.
And it looks to me as if there's lots of rubble over there.
Yes.
Well, it looks to me as if you might have the sort of chancel coming out here and the rest of it back there. So, yeah, if you can drop us on that.
The earliest documentary reference for this church is in 1218, but we've no clue to when it was actually built. Hopefully this trench will tell us that, and most importantly, if it was built on the site of an earlier Saxon church. Mick's keen to widen our search for Saxon material in the village, and he's gone off to see if he can get permission to dig test pits in a few back gardens.
Right, it must be this one.
I better ask the boss.
Go on then.
Can you show us your garden and we can have a look at it?
Thanks.
You know the idea, we just dig a 1 by 1 metre pit to see what sort of pottery and stuff you've got, and you know, that'll tell us a lot about the way the village has developed. I mean, do you mind us disturbing your grass?
We'll be as careful as we can.
That's okay. Anything, anywhere.
Because I mean, if you take
This family have already collected a few finds and stored them near the stream that was once the boundary between the two villages.
and the stream's virtually dried up, hasn't it?
Yeah, it does. I mean, in the winter, that'll actually flow over that pipe for about 6 or 7 inches.
Really?
Yeah.
So this is our stream, isn't it, Mick? that's
Yeah,
on
but
the-
you can't believe it. It's all dried up right the way through, you know.
Yeah.
These are them.
These are the stones.
Oh,
and
yes,
that.
right.
The pottery is on, unfortunately only small bits.
But I mean, that looks like building stone.
Yeah, it's good.
So that, yeah, so that's very good news. That suggests you might have had a building or a house on the site originally.
Yeah.
So-
Well, that
so-
was under. There used to be a garage there, and that was under the base. My
Yeah.
wife dug all that out by hand.
Meanwhile, over here in Wickhammon, I'm trying to get permission for more test pits, and the garden of this house seems to be perfect. Oh, nice house.
What a beautiful pool, Tony.
Oh.
Look at that. You're lucky in this weather.
Wow. It goes on for miles.
It just keeps on going, even in that direction.
On and on and on. Well, I think we're going to need to consult about where best to put it. But you wouldn't mind, provided we don't do it over there, that we put something in. It would only be little.
Yeah, that's fine. Anywhere.
This garden is especially interesting because it's got a curved boundary round it, and it's just next to our church site in Wickhammon. We're approaching the end of the day now, but I'm keen to see how we're getting on unearthing a church that was last seen way back in 1619. Raksha, you've got something.
Yeah, we're starting to see something eventually. We have these rather substantial stones here. And then if you look at these two, they're faced off, so...
So could that be the outside wall of the church?
Part of it, certainly. Not all of it, but part of it.
What do you mean part of it?
It'd be wider than that.
Beginning of day 2 here at Wicken in Northamptonshire, where we're looking for the origins of the village. Actually, it's a bit more complicated than that because in the Middle Ages it was split into 2 villages. You had Wickdeeve here where we are now, and then a little stream, and then Wickhammon over here. So far here in Wickdeeve we've had some Anglo-Saxon pottery out of that field and some mysterious earthworks, but as yet no structures, so we're going to keep on digging here. But the most exciting part of the day for me is that we're adopting a test pit strategy, which means we're going to dig lots of little holes all over the village, and in order to do that we've recruited an army of volunteers who Mick and Richard are now briefing. We're putting in test pits in both Wickdeeve and Wickhammon.
Don't assume, because it doesn't look interesting, that it isn't. You know, if any doubts at all, keep it.
The worry is that they might not recognise Saxon pottery.
It basically looks like dog biscuits, but terribly important, you know.
The test pits will only be 1 metre square, but they'll help to build up a picture of where people were living in medieval and Saxon times. Our test pits are going in on gardens coloured green on this map. But I'm wondering if we really need any more, because all these red dots record test pits already dug by Cardiff University.
But I mean, you always do need more, because the finer the number that you've got, the more you can see the variations in different parts of the village.
This is the area that I found so frustrating last night.
Why did you find that frustrating?
Well, because we've got loads and loads of finds from it and absolutely no Anglo-Saxon structures.
If you'd have stayed around a bit longer and not skived off as you did, you would have actually been aware that we actually found post holes last night.
Really?
In that trench, there are post holes.
Dense. So if we can bottom out the footings, maybe we'll find phasing there.
One of Raksha's main jobs now will be to dig down alongside the outer wall to see if it's been built on the foundations of an earlier church. Meanwhile, over at Wick, Matt's got some good news about one of our new trenches.
We've got a ditch. You can see the edge of it coming along here. We've just got to the bottom of it here. It's about 20 centimetres deep. So we've got one side there. Unfortunately, the other side is just beyond the section here, so I think we'll have to extend it a little bit just to get the full width of it.
Even better, we've got some pottery to date it.
Isn't that fantastic?
It's 10th century. It's exactly what we're looking for. It's near to where it's the classic late Saxon pottery in this part of the world.
But it's early days yet. We don't know if it is a ditch until we extend the trench to find the other edge of it. But we do have our first really good evidence of people living around here in Saxon times. Which way round does this go?
The rim's in turn, so it's kind of like that.
And how deep is it?
Oh, maybe 3 inches at the most.
Oh, quite small.
Yeah.
And how wide?
In a bit. Yeah, about that probably.
So sort of shepherd's pie size?
Oh yeah, they're quite small. You do sometimes get them with sockets in the side that you could put wooden handles in and use them as frying pans.
Helen? What are you doing here? I thought you were supposed to be over at Wick. But it's Raksha's end of the trench that's got everybody excited. Why, what we got, Raksha?
Well, I decided to extend the trench because we wanted to see whether we could find any earlier phases of the wall. And as we were going down, we seemed to have found a burial.
A burial?
Yeah. You can see this soft material here, which is the fill of the grave, and this is quite hard, and you can see the cut just going all the way around. We found some ribs popping up here. There's a bit of a clavicle, which is this bone just here. But the really interesting thing about it is that it's north-south aligned.
And it's underneath that wall there?
Yeah, it's underneath the wall.
So it's earlier than the wall. And when do we think the wall is?
Well, we think that this church complex is about 13th century.
So what's the big deal about it being north-south?
Well, most medieval burials are supposed to be west-east. You have your head to the west and your body to the east. And that's true for the vast majority of the medieval period. But the further you go back into the Anglo-Saxon period, life is not so simple. They haven't quite made a decision about exactly how they should be burying each other. And sometimes you do get these anomalous, weird burials. And I think this might be one of them.
So the discovery of a burial actually under a wall is more than we could have hoped for. It should help to date the construction of the wall. And better still, it could be proof that we found evidence of a Saxon settlement here in Wickhammon as well. But typically, just as I start to get excited, I'm given the bad news from Wick.
What we thought was a ditch actually looks more like a pit now.
Not only has our ditch turned out to be a pit, but Matt's discovered medieval pottery in it, suggesting it was dug in the 12th century rather than in Saxon times. Where's these post holes you were so pleased with then? Phil's got news too. He's finished digging his post holes, and they too are part of the medieval history of Wick.
And this is actually a wall. Now, if you follow up through here, you can project it right the way through here, and when you get to here, it forms a right angle with these big earthworks of the manorial complex.
These are walls likely to have been put in by the manor and connected with the later use of this field. All the evidence suggests that in the 13th century, this field contained numerous wooden houses fronting onto the road, close to the manor house and church. Then it appears these houses were all cleared away when the Lord of Wick extended the grounds around the manor sometime in the 15th century. As well as adding to the picture of medieval Wick, we also want to work out the layout of medieval Wickhammon. We've already managed to locate the exact position of the church, and we're learning all sorts of details about what it looked like.
Oh, wow. Look at that. Isn't that an amazing decoration?
That is fabulous.
You can imagine there must have been 4 of them there, curving around in a circle. It's quite fancy, no matter where it is, isn't it? I mean, we haven't found anything else like that in the trench.
No, we haven't. That's amazing.
So you've actually got some pigeonholes on the left-hand side there.
We've got the remnants of 2 rows of pigeonholes with the little ledges where the birds could land.
Yeah.
Mick, that's really substantial,
It is fantastic, isn't it?
So what does that tell us?
Well, presumably we're near a manorial complex or something like that.
I think we're in the manorial farm.
Right.
Lords have a monopoly on the keeping of doves and the brewing of ale.
Yeah.
So we're very much close to the Lord here, I think.
But do you think this is the manorial complex itself? Because I mean, I've been looking at the layout of the village and the boundaries around it. The dovecot is over here and the church is over here. They seem quite a long way apart for this to be within the manorial enclosure.
After analysing all the maps, Stuart reckons this curving boundary is a clue that the manor house was situated here. This would make sense, as it would put the manor house and the church close together as they are in Wick. It's possible that the dovecot and the brew house were kept separate as a kind of little industrial unit. This is the first time anyone's ever been able to picture the two manors of Wickhammon and Wick together. With the day almost over, there's just time to water the trenches and the archaeologists, while Mick and I check the progress in our test pits. How are you getting on with the test pits, mate?
Yeah, pretty good. I've been round them all now, and most of them are producing medieval pottery.
It's all pretty much Pottersbury ware, sort of 1250, 1300 onwards. There's a few bits of earlier stuff, maybe 12th century, but nothing before that. They're all ongoing. I mean, you know, some are deeper than others. Some are only about 20 centimetres deep, some are about 40 centimetres deep.
I think you should knock off now. It's late, it's hot. We'll do the rest tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow, as they go deeper, they'll turn up some Saxon evidence. Helen's worry is that we might not have discovered an in situ burial under the wall of the church. So far, we've found no trace of a skull, and they could just be random bones. Digging graves is a slow process, but with less than a day to go, hopefully we'll get an answer soon. But there's a lot more to this trench than just old bones. We're discovering all sorts of details about the history of this church.
Wow, look at that.
Beautiful, isn't it? I mean, these tiles are really small, and they're actually smaller than some of those decorated tiles that we've had, which suggests an earlier phase of flora. They are very small. I've seen them small in a sort of church environment. They're tiny.
But it's not just in the trenches that we're uncovering the forgotten history of Wicken. Stuart's been making some important discoveries of his own about the village green and the large garden belonging to the rectory. I sometimes get the feeling at the beginning of day 3 that we've been summoned by Stuart.
To be told what's going on.
Stuart spotted on an old map that these two areas were both covered in houses that have been cleared away since the map was drawn in 1717.
And what they've done is just cleared all those properties away to create a large garden, and they're diverting the stream to put ponds in there. It's a piece of ornamental landscape into their garden.
It's just like when they used to build the stately homes.
That's right, get rid of the peasants.
Well, it's a mini one, isn't it? It's a mini park, really.
That's right.
Is what they're doing, yeah.
Well, the biggest surprise, though, is that Stuart reckons this stream wasn't the boundary between the two villages in medieval times.
In fact, the layout of the village is actually quite regular over here, and I think the road is more likely to be part of the structure and division between the two villages.
You've caught us at the most exciting moment. We think we found at least part of a skull in the grave cut.
And the other thing that's really exciting is we've just extended the trench. Out of the machining came a piece of pottery.
Paul has dated that to Maxiware 650 to 750.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's the early stuff we've got then.
I know it is beginning to raise the possibility that there is activity, including burials, on this site, right from the Middle Saxon period.
Point of clarification, are you the same archaeologist who was so miserable round the bonnet of the man earlier on?
Fantastic. We have got an in situ burial, and it could be 1300 years old, although it has been disturbed by later building on this site.
We've got this grave cut here. The skull would have been just under the wall here, but as you can see, because they were building the wall, they've messed around with it, and the skull has actually travelled down to here. None of the bones are articulated. They're just a jumbled mess. And here we have some of the teeth.
That's hardly worn at all. That's
No.
like a juvenile or a young adult,
Yeah.
isn't it?
This bit comes from a pot that would have looked something like this, and surely it's an encouraging sign that there was something going on here in Saxon times. We've only got a few hours left to find out, so it's just as well that we're starting to make sense of the medieval church. We wanted to find the junction between the nave, where the congregation stood, and the chancel, where the altar was, and it looks like we've found it.
Usually the tower's added later in the sequence, isn't it?
Yeah.
So by the time we put the tower on, I think that would have side aisles.
And this is how we think it looked before it was pulled down in the 17th century. Although the focus is now very much on the church here in Wickhammon, there's still the job of sorting out all the information gleaned from our various test pits. Essentially, what we've been doing is adding lots of new information to the archaeological map. such as the lost road and buildings discovered here in the rectory gardens.
Well, nearly everything from this test pit's medieval. It's the Pottersbury again, mid-13th to 14th.
We didn't find any trace of Saxon history in these back gardens, but the medieval pottery finds add to the picture of how the village of Wicken expanded around 1200 AD.
Yeah, I mean, it all seems to be from the pottery the same date along this entire block. I mean, I can't imagine that these things just, sprung up simultaneously by accident, certainly.
No.
So.
It strikes me that we might have a bit of village planning going on here in Wicken.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Want us to make more episodes? Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses and more. And you get to have your say in the process as we develop new sites.
A few years ago, Nick and Susan Howard and their family moved into their new house here at Blythburgh in Suffolk. They were pottering around in one of their garden sheds, looking at one of the innumerable old cupboards, and they discovered that. A bit alarming, certainly. A bit scary, I think so, but not really surprising when you look at the rest of the garden. Isn't it fantastic? Looks a bit like a little church, doesn't it? Well, we know that King Henry I founded a priory somewhere in Blythburgh in the 12th century. And 500 years before that, a Saxon king was killed on these marshes and buried here. Could this overgrown garden have been one of the most sacred sites in East Anglia? It's a fantastic house. What's it called?
It's called the Priory.
And what's the road called running alongside it?
Priory Road.
Mick, do you think there might be some kind of clue there?
I think it's a bit of a clue, isn't it? There's something going on. We know there was a 12th century Augustinian priory in Blythburgh, so it's somewhere in this area.
You do realise that in order to find out what's going on here, we're really going to have to wallop your garden hard.
Yes, we understand that, but we'd rather that you didn't know before we start the restoration of the formal gardens.
Formal gardens. There's posh.
This is what I call herringbone masonry, because it looks like the bones of a fish. And it's a building style that you see in the Roman period, but you also get it right at the end of the Anglo-Saxon period into the beginning of the Norman period.
So are you saying that this whole building could be either from just before or just after William the Conqueror arrived?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably around about 1100, something like that, but round about that Norman conquest period.
This date is our first clue, as a 12th century Norman priory should follow a basic plan. There should be a great hall, dormitory for the monks to sleep in, and a refectory or dining area forming 3 sides of a cloister. And on the 4th side, there should be a church. And Mick's now confident that's what we have in this garden. So we're putting in a couple of trenches against this wall to test if the cloister is on the southern side of the church. And we're getting lots of broken brick and roof tile. But unfortunately, nothing that immediately screams cloister. But on the other side of the wall, Phil has found foundations that confirm Mick was right about these ruins. This was a church.
Oh, that is cracking stuff. It's the floor of the church. See, it's got this straight edge here. Well, look, that one's broken, but this is a lovely straight edge running across there. So that's just literally, presumably, a panel that goes around the outside. The main floor, they have that up. And you can see here, look, we've actually got the wall of the building here. Look how protected that is. Look, lovely, smooth surface there.
What's the colour about, Phil, then? The black and the yellow kind of? Is that
some sort of glazing or?
Yeah, it is. They're glazed touch. So, I mean, if we get a few more of them, I mean, it may well be that we can get them into some sort of maybe checkerboard pattern, so they would have been black and white. Yeah.
Oh, wow. You're going to dig that way?
Just try and stop us.
All right.
Hey, what you could do, you own the place.
When we arrived, I just assumed the Priory Church would be no more than a small chapel. But Bob, our buildings expert, believes there's far more to it. This column is now so eroded it looks like something out of Death Valley. But it's actually the remains of a sophisticated piece of architecture.
It really is a column, because if you look high up, you can see there's a change in angle, and there's a slight indent, and it comes in at a higher level. It suggests that we're on a triforium, so that there's probably another layer of arches running off in the other direction, perhaps only for one bay, but nonetheless, it's part of a pier.
What we have is this Price's reference in the 12th century Book of Ely, and it specifically refers to the death and burial at a place called Blythburgh. So we're talking about clearly a very important royal shrine, recognised and almost certainly invested in by Ely for its upkeep and maintenance. And indeed, the founding of the priory may relate to that shrine.
But that's extremely interesting, isn't it? If Anna's bones are still here in the 12th century, they could potentially be here to this day.
That's right. We know he's here somewhere in Blythburgh. And what's going on here in the 12th century? Why does King Henry make this great gesture and encourage this great priory to be founded? Or is it a refoundation of the early royal minster? That's the fascinating possibility. So this could really be one of the great discoveries of all time.
Sam believes there's a chance that when King Henry I founded the priory in Blythburgh, he built it on the site of the earlier Saxon church and its shrine to King Anna or Anna. But unfortunately, we've got to sort out the Norman priory layout first before we can deal with whatever else might be here. And frustratingly, John's now wandered off into next door's garden, determined to find out how far the priory church stretches away to the west. Stuart's sure Blythburgh would have been a sacred or religious refuge for centuries before King Anna died. His burial would almost certainly have attracted pilgrims for hundreds of years after. But would it have been to our sight?
I feel really perplexed about this, John.
Well, it would help if we could work out exactly what we have here. We're certain we have a priory church. The problem is the geophys doesn't really have much evidence for the rest of the priory.
I mean, clearly they're showing something. They're either showing, well, you say walls, there might be robber pits, whatever.
Well, look, they're definitely walls. The resistance there, that's the wall in Faye's Trench.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that. So if that's a wall, there's no reason why these shouldn't be walls.
That would leave us with such a small cloister, if that's what's being indicated there, that I just wonder whether either the cloister is on the other side of the church, on the north side of the church over here, or that we're looking for a much more unconventional and irregular plan than we were expecting.
Well, Mick did warn me it wasn't going to be easy. But really, our geophys isn't working for us. And I'm not sure our trenches have told us that much either.
Nothing like an easy sight.
John's got it in one. And behind that calm exterior, I think Mick's really panicking. Why? Well, because none of us can understand this place, and it should be so simple.
If we get rid of that tree there.
We've already got all these trenches open looking for church walls, other buildings and the priory cloisters, but Mick wants more, including one trench in the middle of a hedge.
Hang on, you're in the fence. All the ivy's caught up in the fence.
But there is method in this madness, as Phil's new trench should locate the east end of the church to go with Matt's west end. So, realistically, after a day and a half of digging, we've got a priory church, but no priory. The only thing we've succeeded in is transforming this once elegant garden into something much less picturesque. It's a building site now, let's be honest.
It's a bit now, yeah.
We've got, what, 2 trenches there?
Well, no, 3. There's one down the bottom there as well.
Yeah, all right, 3. We've got one just round the corner there.
And one over the fence in the next garden.
All right, come through here a minute. Come on, we've got one there.
Yeah, that's finished, that one.
One round the corner there.
And that's finished.
Little one there.
Yeah, that doesn't count.
Oh, doesn't it? Right, we've got one here.
That's finished,
over
yeah.
there. It's more like a pick and mix counter than what I think of as an archaeological dig.
I share your worries.
That's fair enough. I can breathe easier now. Carefully you don't fall down one of those little holes.
There we are. Quite confident that's a male. That's all we seem to have had so far is evidence for males.
One thing Mick knows is that there should be loads, even hundreds of burials at the foot of these consecrated walls. Which isn't that surprising, given that Blythburgh Priory was lived in for 400 years before Henry VIII dissolved it.
He found them and we all kind of shrieked and, oh, Mama, Daddy, Daddy!
And as Susan and her family found out, their remains can turn up in the most unexpected places.
We've got 3 different skulls.
Have you got enough to know whether they might be male or female?
Well, this one here is definitely male because you've got this enormous nuchal crest sticking out here.
Where is
that's the bit right at the back of the skull here. We're quite broad across here. It's quite flared at the back of the mandible, and it's fairly squared at the front, which again looks like a masculine one.
Well, there's a damn great hole there, look.
It's intriguing, isn't it? Can I put my hand in, or will
Yeah, well, I reckon. I think.
I don't want to get bit.
There ain't nobody in there, is it?
I don't know yet. Ah!
Yeah.
No, it's incredible, isn't it?
You don't want to go fertling about in there too much,
No.
because if there's something in there that is undisturbed...
It's a sobering thought. If Phil's going to find a vault or shrine associated with King Anna, then this is the place. The archaeology is once again causing all sorts of headaches. At the West End, Matt still hasn't found a wall big enough to hold up a church. While at the East End, Phil's finding more holes, and they don't look much like a Saxon shrine.
There's another bally-great void in there. I wonder whether we ain't got just big burrows. Whether that isn't what's creating our big hole down there.
This is more like Watership Down than Time Team, and Phil's probably got layers of demolition rubble to shift before he gets to any foundations. Whoever looted the stone from this old priory did a pretty thorough job.
The charters tell us that in around about 1300, there was an infirmary there. And with an infirmary, you would have an infirmary orchard.
But although we're struggling with the archaeology, we're still building up a fascinating picture of our priory.
We also have an inventory taken when the priory was dissolved, and it mentions a number of buildings. First of all, we have the religious ones. We've got the vestry mentioned, we've got the choir, we've got a chapel, but then we get mention of the kitchen, we get mention of the pantry, we get mention of the hall, we get mention of the parlour. These are the domestic activities of the priory. And then we get mention of a brew house.
Now, a brew house would be really, really fab, because I would like to brew.
It's the northern wall of the church.
Yeah, so that lines up pretty well.
We've confirmed the north wall of the Norman church, and the trench is producing a jumble of roof tile, medieval window glass, and the church floor. But if there was an Anglo-Saxon monastery here, you'd have thought we'd have also found some Anglo-Saxon stuff with a hole this deep. Unfortunately, there's not a hint, not a smidge so far. At least there's progress at the East End, where Phil's uncovered big foundations as well as human remains.
Yeah, that's a bit of pelvis there, and there's a bit of rib there. And then in here, look, no, we've got a whacking great leg bone, I think.
Yeah. These bones here are sat in this light, sandy-coloured material right at the base of here, on which this wall appears to stand, which means these bones are potentially earlier than the construction of the priory itself.
Because they're under the rubble platform which was used to construct the priory. So
Exactly.
if you're finding Anglo-Saxon skulls here, the minster's back in the frame, isn't it?
It certainly is.
Since we arrived, Helen's always been convinced that King Anna's here somewhere.
So what are we likely to get here?
Well, we're going to have the east wall, the altar, and between the altar and the east wall is the classic place for shrine. So if we have King Anna here in the 12th century... because he could have been, bear with me, if we have King Anna here in the 12th century, he's likely to be here through the whole of the medieval period. So this is the place that he's most likely to be.
Look, I'm going to be happy if we get the east wall of the church.
Back inside the church, Kerry's cleaned up the foot of the pillar, and it confirms this was an internal column, proving Bob's theory that the priory church had an aisle outside the nave.
A couple of days ago, you said that they couldn't be columns because they'd be the size of Tewkesbury Abbey or something. Monstrously enormous.
It's big. It's a special building. It really is. It must be the best bit of 13th century in the region.
We can now see how much land King Henry I gave the Augustinians to found the priory.
I've tried to get outside it to try and understand the precinct within which...
And there was rather more to it than the ruins in Nick and Susan's back garden.
We've in fact only got a relatively small part of the site which is protected at the moment, pretty much just the core. And we're trying to really work out what the special archaeological interest of the site is. Well, if I overlay
my sort of little coloured drawing of the top of the modern layout of the village.
From the old roads and boundaries, we can see how the priory site dominated the village and didn't include the parish church, which came later.
There's the church in the village, and that's where the priory is. They're two separate sites. So what we've got, in effect, is a precinct, which is all that area in there.
That's fantastic.
The Augustinians clearly had a large and powerful establishment here in Blythburgh, and Stewart suspects it could be situated on an earlier royal minster. And we've now found signs of earlier, possibly Saxon occupation in both Jackie's and Matt's trenches. In fact, Matt's got proof of several earlier buildings on this site.
Got over that side.
Well, just behind me there, I've got a glazed tile, which is identical to the one we've got next to that wall. So I know I've got that floor level.
Yeah.
But behind me, in the Victorian cut, we've got the same level, and below that, I've got an earlier floor, really substantial, and below that, an early post hole as well. So I've got stuff going down pretty deep.
So the post hole is sealed by 2 floor levels?
Yep.
All right.
This structure could potentially be the earliest settlement on the site, and with a stretch of the imagination, even the place where King Anna might have been brought after his death on the marshes.
Well, it all looks fairly sort of typical high medieval. It looks like Grimston were. They're making it up in Norfolk near King's Lynn. That's exactly the sort of thing you'd expect to see used on the tables. Nice green glaze, nice sort of decoration on it. I mean, yeah, that fits perfectly.
Could this be evidence of the refectory or dining room Mick suspected was here?
You know, usage, more refractory?
Well, probably not. One pot doesn't make a refectory. Yes, there was a building here, but not the one we're looking for. If it had been part of the cloistral range, there would have been hundreds, even thousands of bodies laid to rest around here. So, after 3 days of searching, Mick has conceded that the cloister must have been on the north side.
It's most likely to be either Roman or Saxon.
And after a huge amount of work, John's mission to find the east end of the church has come to nothing. We couldn't recover enough material to be sure it was from the priory church, or for that matter, the earlier Saxon church.
It's an unusual stone type. It's not the same stone that we've got in the priory.
But without digging here, we wouldn't have found this large, well-preserved male skeleton. It was buried with this amazing brooch, which dates the body to the late 13th century, when the priory was probably at its zenith. At the height of its power, the priory must have been an awe-inspiring place, a wealthy royal foundation and a focal point for pilgrims for hundreds of years. Radiocarbon analysis suggests the burials in Phil's Trench date to 930 AD. That means this man was buried 200 years before Henry I's priory was built on top of him. And in Jackie's Trench at the foot of the church, the bones date much further back to the mid-7th century. That's around the time that King Anna was killed. So we can safely say that we've looked the Saxons in the face. It looks as if their church was here on this site, even though it could have been destroyed in later Viking raids. As for the whereabouts of King Anna's tomb, that still remains a mystery. So even after this hugely frustrating dig with all its puzzles and dead ends, we can show Nick and Susan that an impressive Augustinian church ran across more than the full width of their garden, with a great tower held up by pillars towards the east end and a cloister to the north. Nick, you've been glued to this for ages now, haven't you?
Yes, it's fascinating.
I bet when we came here, you never thought you'd see all this.
No, it's been mind-blowing. Mind-blowing because, firstly, I didn't realise just how big the church was.
Yeah.
I just had no concept whatsoever.
You didn't even really know you got a church here,
Well,
did you?
didn't. I had no idea whatsoever.
It doesn't bother you that we found all these skeletons?
No.
I've got a sneaking suspicion Susan absolutely adores it.
She does that.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses, and more. Please join us on this exciting journey. We need more support to make more episodes.
180 years ago, a local vicar put a trench in this field and decided it was the site of one of the biggest Roman homes in Britain. But not only that, another dig about the same time claimed to have found a beautiful walled Roman cemetery a few hundred yards away, probably part of the same complex. So you've got this massive villa, an elaborate cemetery. This stuff ought to be in the history books. Only problem is, nearly all the records have been lost.
Lovely. That is a very nice example of a Roman hairpin.
Because the locals have been finding loads of Roman stuff all over the village for decades.
So that's huge Roman tile. I mean, look at it. That's got to be part of a Roman floor. Got to be.
Including a lot of stuff in this small copse to the south of our main field.
Phil, Raksha, what have you got down in the woods?
But our scratching around in the copse has just produced some lovely Roman archaeology.
There's just enough here to indicate that we do have a floor and that that's where they come from.
Oh, good grief.
This really is a cracking little discovery, although it's much too early to say what kind of building this stretch of paving belongs to. In the meantime, there's still the small matter of the main field, where, according to the antiquarian map, there should be a massive, positively palatial villa.
We've done a really big chunk, both magnetically, all over this field and in the paddock on that side, and magnetically we're seeing old ditches that are visible on the tithe map.
Can you see anything else there that might be a Roman villa?
Nothing. If there was a major villa where we've surveyed, I'm sure we'd see it.
So our first trench in this massive field goes in on the basis of a single 170-year-old map. It's hardly the most scientifically robust target we've ever had, but then again...
Hold them in. Hey! Bit of Roman roof tile. I think that's a bit of...
After the frustration of this morning, it's good to know that we seem to be in the right place. I'm going to ask Ben the question that no one else seems to have the bottle to ask you. Suppose there isn't a villa here at all?
I think we've definitely got a villa. I mean, you don't get that amount of building material, you don't get the tessellated pavement, the wall plaster, all these finds without there being a villa here. There must be a villa here.
What about the one tangible piece of evidence we've got, the copse? What's going on there?
Clearly an important building, or part of a building. I mean, have a look at this. I mean, we could be talking about a bathhouse, for example, typically a bit peripheral or you know, towards the edge of the area because of the fire risk. Could it be that it's one of the reception rooms? Nice mosaic in there. Could it be even one of the main living spaces? We haven't got quite enough to go on. It might then acquire...
Well, Ben's big, shiny, graphic imaginings are all well and good. But they're quite a leap from the reality of the site that so far produced quite a lot of nothing. Although I will admit the structure in the copse has cleaned up pretty well. Oh, Ben, this is it. This is Roman archaeology. We can sleep tonight after all.
Yes, you didn't believe me quite, did you? But here we are. Tessellated pavement, maybe the interior of a room. We've even got what looks like a doorway there, look, worn by people's tread to and fro. And a huge, substantial wall, chalk clunch wall running through here. So no question about it, we've got a big building here.
And where do you think it goes?
Well, yeah, where does it go? We've got a bit of a problem heading in that direction because, of course, Matt's Trench doesn't have anything Roman in it, it appears. We also have to think about how far east does this building go. So what we plan to do tomorrow is to extend, do some test pitting and chart how big this building is in that direction.
By the east, you mean into people's gardens?
Yeah, I'm afraid so, yeah.
Beginning of day 2 here in the little Cambridgeshire village of Litlington, and we've gone from the sublime to the ridiculous. Yesterday, we were trawling through 8 acres of that field looking for a lost Roman villa, which we couldn't find. So today, we're going to be digging there and here and there. Off you go, team. These 3 test pits are just the beginning of a concerted effort to understand what was going on in Roman Litlington. As the only thing we've really established so far is that the gigantic villa recorded in this 1836 plan isn't in this field. So far, Phil's corner and Fay's plastered wall are the only reliable Roman archaeology we've uncovered. It may not be a lot, but guess what? It's enough for Stuart and Henry to come up with a theory.
They've now got walls in Phil's and Fay's trenches, so I've surveyed those in. Now I have extrapolated those a little bit. It looks to me like they're part of the same plan.
They suspect the antiquarians who made this plan did see a massive villa, they just happened to draw it in the wrong place.
The alignment of that, actually, that's the copse you've got in there, and the alignment of the things you've got there are the same.
Yeah.
They're going in that same axis, so whether these are related to different building to that, or whether that's a misunderstanding of the antiquarians and really that building was down there, it's all a bit up in the air at the moment.
If Stuart's right and the villa is further south, that would explain why bits of tiled floor were found under these barns 20 years ago. Then again, if the antiquarians got the position of the villa wrong, they may also have got its size wrong. And that's why the back garden test pits are so important.
Nothing Roman at all.
So how much further before you give up and say, well, that's it?
From this level that I'm on now, I would say another foot maybe or so.
Yeah, then you give up.
Then I'll give up, yeah.
Because if we dig enough holes, we should find the true size and location of the building that's produced so much Roman archaeology over the years.
So do you think that's a bit of wall you found there, then?
Well, I think we're definitely down to some kind of Roman layer.
It's vital we uncover as much information as we can, because the antiquarians left virtually no written records about their digs. And yet, surprisingly, many of their finds have survived.
You come up here and come and see the dead Roman. You not move back, let the other children come forward and come see the dead Roman in the pot.
And thanks to the Antiquities Museum in Cambridge, many of them have been given a day trip back to where they were found.
But I bet you'd quite like to drink wine out of something like this. That's little
young, aren't they?
wine. No, I don't know. You have water in it as well. I'm sure they'd have started off early. So that's a wine drinking cup.
Have you ever seen anybody grinding up food in the kitchen? Yeah, that's for grinding food. So that was once a Roman lady's bowl in the kitchen. She had to stand there and grind her food up. Maybe it broke one day and she chucked it out.
This collection of pottery is recorded as coming from the Villa and Grand Roman Cemetery at Litlington. And it would appear from these finds that the history of the cemetery, known locally as Heaven's Walls, and the villa are intimately linked. So we're going to try and find the location of Heaven's Walls. And unfortunately, that means using the map that's already caused us all sorts of trouble.
The plan also shows a cemetery area. There are lots of really juicy cemetery finds. There were pots, there were objects, all sort of things, even suggestions that something might here be a tomb. So I would suggest that we start at the edge of those back gardens there and do a swathe of geophysics, something like that, between the stubble field and into the ploughed field.
That looks about 3 days' work on its own.
So Geophys trudge off to another massive field to look for another missing antiquarian site. I'm getting a feeling of déjà vu here.
This is where Raksha's doing. Hiya. Hello. Hello. How's it going? Enjoying my tea break.
I can see you're really snowed under, aren't you?
Back up on the main site, our first test pits have had mixed results. We've basically found nothing of note in 2 of the gardens, but Raksha's trench has produced something.
So we've got this, which looks kind of convincing. Very abraded bit of tessera and plaster.
This mix of scrappy bits of plaster and chalk suggests demolition of a nearby Roman building. If I was feeling optimistic, I would say that we're slowly closing in on our target. And that can mean only one thing. Raksha and our diggers moving into new gardens to continue the search for the villa.
Should we do it together? No. No? OK.
But back in the copse, there's been a breakthrough, and Phil now thinks he is digging a bathhouse.
But now we got down here, we've got this concrete type block in here. Now this is, well, I'm sure it's in situ. It's not a piece of loose debris. I'm wondering, because it's in a hole, whether I'm in one of the pools of a bathhouse.
Well, let me hop in here. So I mean, you're close to the sort of, a mosaic floor behind you, which is, what you'd expect near to that sort of structure within a villa. And you've got, it's definitely sort of, say brick stroke tile.
So what you're trying to say is, I think you are right, Phil. I think you do have a bathhouse.
I might be right, absolutely. Let's hope so. We now have archaeologists all over Litlington, turning the village upside down. But we still haven't found any other major Roman structure outside of the copse.
Right down the bottom here, we've got part of one of the baths that they would have got into.
Which we're now fairly sure is indeed a bathhouse.
Where I'm standing now would have been quite a big open room with certainly a pool in here.
When you say baths, Phil, you don't mean baths like we have, do you?
I don't mean a 6-foot bath with taps at the end, no. The Romans had very, very special ways of having baths. They had at least 3 rooms, and it was a real ritual.
They all used to bath together, and often they didn't get cleaned out all that much, and they would shave in the bath and all the hairs would be floating on the surface, and there'd be all manky soap on the surface as well, and then eventually they'd have to get some poor slave would come in and scrape all this stuff off.
It's a bit like my bath at home, actually. Nobody ever told me that you had to empty it.
A little bit too much information there. Over there are the 3 houses with the back gardens into which we put the test pits this morning, and unfortunately we drew a blank. But in this back garden there is a trench which, if you are interested in archaeology, you just love to have in your garden. John, is that what I think it is?
Yes, tessellated floor.
Does it look like the one in Phil's trench?
Yes, it's just like the one in Phil's trench, really. It's the sort of coarse tesserae you see in these Roman buildings, so...
How far away do you reckon his trench is?
Well, we're probably a good 30 to 40 metres away from Phil, where he is now.
So it's not the same building?
Well, it could be the same building, could well be. It just means bigger building.
This is a small but major breakthrough, which is why we're throwing everything we have at this site, with countless trenches in back gardens and fields all around the village.
Where do you find these tesserae then?
We just found them in this corner here, in this corner. Yes.
We've also continued to put test pits in gardens that produced Roman finds.
Is this mostly Roman that's coming up, would you say?
It looks like there's another piece of tesserae.
Oh, yes, brilliant.
Right there.
Oh, fantastic.
And this game of archaeological battleships is beginning to give us a rough idea of how big an area a Roman building could have covered here.
This looks pretty solid. Here's the wall. That's solid, it's coming down. Solid, solid. I think that might be the base of something.
So it would seem that we may have at last uncovered some solid evidence of the Roman cemetery. And with only a few hours to go, it looks like we may have finally got a handle on this blasted villa.
I think I've got a floor surface here.
Really?
Yeah. Look in that corner. See how much more solid that is?
Oh, yeah. It looks like Ben's test pit strategy is at last paying off. So, thanks to a lot of hard graft, determination and countless cups of tea, we're finally beginning to work out how much of Litlington is built on top of the villa.
Thank heavens I've found you, Raksha. I feel like a door-to-door salesman going around these gardens. What have you got then?
Oh, Stu, I've persevered for 2 days now. This is the 3rd garden I've been in.
Yeah.
This is the third test pit I've done. And I've actually come up with the goods.
Oh, wow. What have you got?
I found this amazing robbed-out wall,
right.
which is exactly what we were looking for.
And this is definitely in situ and you're confident it's a Roman period wall?
Yes, we've had lots and lots of Roman finds coming out of here.
That is so nice, because this is your test pit in here.
Yeah.
The blue dots and walls, where we've actually got good Roman buildings still sitting in their original position in the ground. The orange zones are where we've got spreads of demolition rubble showing there are walls and things nearby. Now that actually starts to make sense. If you take a corridor villa with 2 wings, and this is one that's not that far from here, really, and if you put it over here, it fits quite nicely with stuff in situ there, stuff in situ here, corridor going across that way, oriented to the south, which is exactly what you would expect. I think you deserve an ice cream for your perseverance, you know.
So, with more pieces of the jigsaw falling into place, we can begin to put some of Litlington back together again.
So has this come from more than one room, or from one room, or can't you say?
It looks to me like it's probably come from one room.
And as the plaster we've uncovered in Stephen and Hilary's copse suggests, it was once a rather plush suite of rooms.
Roman walls are incredibly lurid by our standards. They're very deep, heavy, hard colours that I think we would find very oppressive. You'd walk in there and be really quite sort of crushed. You'd probably feel really claustrophobic in a Roman room. But we do know that the Romans painted these very distinct zones on the walls. It tends to have a kind of a bottom third, and then above that a series of vertical panels, in which would normally have been some sort of much more decorative picture, perhaps a mythological scene or maybe a goddess. And had the antiquarians found any bits of wall plaster that had such a figure on it, they would undoubtedly have taken it away.
This finely decorated bathhouse would have been a focus for any villa. And thanks to the results from the test pits and the bits of radar John could get from the back gardens, we think that the villa would have sat roughly in the area now occupied by these houses. But truthfully, that's about it. We can't really say what the villa looked like or what its relationship is to the cemetery we've discovered. And yet most of us feel we've still learned more about Roman Litlington in 3 days than all the previous antiquarian excavations.
We've got now a fantastic record, for the first time, where these walls actually are. For the first time, not just a rumour of a bathhouse and a couple of lines in a scrappy document. We've actually pinned down where the walls are, on what alignment they are.
Nevertheless, goose, wild and chase are words which spring to my mind, although not necessarily in that order.
I will admit there have been certain difficulties with pinning this one down.
Hello, my name's John Gator. Time Team is fan-funded by Patreon. This vital support helps us to make new episodes. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models and masterclasses, plus lots more.